Hi, this is Dave Upton, Senior Customer Success Manager with Microsoft. In this video, I will walk through creating a GraphAPI custom connector, and more specifically, a custom connector using the Bookings API. Step 1 will set up a Microsoft Azure App Registration. To do this, you'll open the Azure portal, click New App Registration, provide it a name, and in this instance, we're going to enable it for any organization directory. Once that's created, there are 3 steps we need to take. The first one is to set up authorization. There's 2 URIs that we need to provide. The first one is for Postman, which we'll be using to create a collection of queries. The second one will be used by the actual custom connector, and I'll show you at a later time where we actually receive that, but in either case, I'll provide them in the description below as well. The next step we'll be doing is creating a client certificate. This will be used by the API to gain access to the app registration. You can name it whatever you want, and you can also provide whatever expiration date for that client secret that your company desires. I've gone and set mine for 12 months. Go ahead and click Add. The key here is to make sure that you use the copy command for the value of that secret. You only get one chance to do that. The third step will be to actually add app permissions for the Microsoft Graph API. These are delegated permissions, so we'll want to open up the delegated permissions, and also what I'm going to do here is search for bookings, because I'm going to be referencing the Microsoft Bookings API. I choose Bookings Manage All. We'll click Add Permission. We'll also click the Grant Admin Consent. This will enable that permission on your tenant. And the last step here will be to actually click on the Bookings Manage All and copy the scope URL. You're going to want to put this into Clipboard, just like you should have done with the client secret. There are several other settings that we'll capture as well. Next, we're going to create a second app API permission, and this is going to be used for authentication. So you'll search for user auth and choose the user authentication method, read write all. Once again, you'll grant admin consent to this as well. Next, we'll go back to the overview, and as mentioned, we'll grab 2 more settings. This will be the application client ID. We'll put that in Notepad, as well as the tenant. We'll put that in Notepad as well. These will be used for setting up the Postman collection, which we'll get to now. Open Postman, open your collections on the left, and we're going to create a brand new collection. Give it whatever name you would like. We're going to set up the authorization. We're going to be using Auth 2.0. We're going to use the fields we captured in our notepad, provided a token name. The callback URL will be the Postman URL provided in the description below. There are also 2 authorization URLs, the Auth URL and the access token URL, both of which you'll have to compile using the URLs provided in the description. You will be replacing a center portion of that with your tenant name. You'll paste in your client ID, the client secret, and that scope that we captured earlier, scope being from the Bookings API. Once you've copied and pasted all those values into the authorization tab in Postman, we'll be able to click the Get Access Token button below. This will pop open a new screen. This may prompt you to log in. For this, once it's authenticated, it'll either close or you can click Proceed. At this point, you have a bearer token. What I'm doing here is I'm actually copying the value in that drop down box there, text box, and I'm setting a key value that I will use in future queries so that I can reference it by name. So I first double check to make sure one doesn't exist, and it doesn't. So I'll go ahead and create a new variable and call it access token. I set the scope of this variable for this collection. We will create a brand new request, and what I'm going to use is the URL from GraphAPI. So I give it a name. This one is we're just going to set up a get. So the URL provided is right from Graph using the beta bookings business. I'm going to set my authentication to bearer token, and I will make sure that that token is referencing the variable that I created. Once I run this, you'll notice below that I now have results, and I have the one booking business that I've created in my demo tenant called Clinical Office. At this point, we're going to export this collection. We're going to do it as a 2.1, click export, save it where you would like, and at this point you have a fully exported Postman collection. We'll move on to the final step, and that is creating your custom connector. We'll open up Microsoft Power Apps and expand the Dataverse menu item. From there, we'll open custom connectors, and in the upper right, we will choose New Custom Connector, Import Postman Collection. We give it a name, and we will choose the file that we exported from Postman. It's read the Postman file and created a standard custom connector. We need to set up the security tab. So we're going to leave OAuth 2.0 at the top, but we need to change the identity provider to Azure Active Directory. We're just going to paste in those same values that we had in Notepad, client ID, client secret. We'll leave the login URL the same. We'll paste in the tenant ID, the resource URL, and the scope. Once we've completed those values, the very last value is the redirect URL. It will be populated upon creation. So once we click Create Connector in the upper right, we'll give it a second to refresh. That redirect URL is the value that we set up already in our app registration. If you didn't have it at the time of creating your app registration, you can come back once you've created your custom connector. You can go update your app registration. So I create connector right here, and you'll notice once it refreshes, that very last redirect URL will be populated with the global consent. You can see that it already picked up from Postman that I had a query called Booking Business, but we need to configure the response. Right now it's a default response, it's just going to get a body. So the way that we do that is we tell it to import from a template. I can go back to Postman and I can grab the response that was returned from that original query. This has the sample data. I can go back into PowerApps, paste that into the body, and tell it to import. It'll determine from that sample that there is an ID and a display name that is returned. We'll be able to use that later in a PowerApp when we're referencing these values. We can reference them by name. From there, we can go ahead and update the connector one more time. I recommend opening a new tab to create a brand new connection to your connector. As we move on to the next step in testing your connector, you'll need to have a connection. And the way that PowerApps works is if you go click on test and create connector, it's going to remove you from that screen and you'll have to get back into it. So I open another tab, I come into the custom connectors. I can now see the one that I just created called Graph Connector. If I click the plus, this will walk through the process of signing in to creating that connection. Once this connection is created, it's now established. I can go back to my previous tab and I can continue on with this wizard. Once I get to the tests, you'll notice that it's now populated in the top. It's in the drop-down box. I click test operation. I only have one operation, so I can't check it off. But if I click test operation, you can now see the exact same results that I received in Postman. And now you have a working custom connector. Thank you.